It's not the darkness that hides the horrors of the evergreen exhibit. It's the light. A light so impossibly still, so perfectly preserved, it captures more than just images. It captures moments that refuse to end, deep within the forgotten industrial heart of an old New England city nestled amidst crumbling brick factories and overgrown rail lines stands the derelict shell of the Evergreen Exhibit Hall. Once a cutting-edge gallery in the 1950s, famous for its revolutionary, living light holographic displays. It closed abruptly in 1958 after the entire staff and its visionary founder, Silas Evergreen, vanished without a trace. The official story cited bankruptcy and an unseasonable blizzard. But the hushed, terrified accounts from the few maintenance workers who dared approach the building spoke of a different, more unsettling truth. Not a power failure, but a profound, unnatural stillness that permeated the air. A silent hum emanating from the exhibition halls, and a terrifying sensation that the very light itself was stuck, holding moments captive in an endless, horrifying loop. Evergreen Exhibit became a chilling local legend, a place where time itself seemed to falter, and where, if you looked closely enough, you could see the shadows of what used to be. This story begins with Dr. Anya Sharma, a 35-year-old quantum optics theorist and visual perception researcher from MIT. Anya wasn't interested in ghost stories or urban exploration. She pursued anomalies in light, the subjective experience of vision, and the subtle ways exotic energy fields could warp or reshape reality. Evergreen Exhibit, with its legendary living light technology and the inexplicable disappearance of its staff, was her ultimate horrifying case study. She'd unearthed fragmented, heavily redacted government patents from the 1950s, hinting at bizarre photon entanglement anomalies and peculiar visual phenomena detected by early crude light measuring devices, and unverified anecdotes from terrified engineers who claimed that on certain nights the exhibit's display halls would shimmer with a light that didn't move, holding static images of impossible events. Anya believed Evergreen Exhibit's true horror lay not in what it displayed, but in what it trapped, and what it truly wasn't. She never intended for her research to freeze her. She certainly never intended for the light itself to remember her. But fragments of her journey, her terrifying descent into the immobile glow, survived, captured on her specialized high-resolution spectral analysis drones, meticulously transcribed from her biofeedback suit's internal audio logs, and ultimately retrieved from a meticulously encrypted, partially melted data core surgically implanted within her abandoned research vehicle, found weeks later miles from the exhibit's desolate perimeter. The first definitive sign that something was irrevocably wrong didn't come from a spectral presence or a sudden chill in the damp, heavy air. It came from the light itself, or rather its utter defiance of natural movement. Anya had navigated the treacherous, overgrown service roads and the dense, mist-shrouded industrial ruins for hours, guided by her advanced GPS mapping and the increasingly erratic readings from her long-range photon flux detectors. She finally located the perimeter of Evergreen Exhibit, a sprawling, dilapidated complex of crumbling brick and shattered glass, its vast empty windows like dark, unseeing eyes. The air hung thick, cold, and strangely devoid of the usual sounds of an abandoned urban environment. No creaking metal, no distant traffic, no wind howling through broken panes. Just a profound, suffocating stillness. She spoke into her field recorder, her voice low, professionally detached, though a subtle undertone of profound curiosity tinged with nascent unease, was already present. November 20th, 10:10 a.m. Location Evergreen Exhibit Hall, New England. Ambient light reflection readings dropping precipitously within 50 meters of the main complex. Registers below typical environmental background. Approaches absolute light stillness. This is anomalous. Extreme photon absorption and stasis. Consistent with folklore. It's like walking into a visual vacuum. She paused, listening intently to the unsettling quiet that pressed in on her eardrums. It wasn't just quiet. It was an emptiness of visual dynamism, an unnerving void that seemed to actively consume all light's movement, all motion. She moved deeper into the complex, her reinforced boots crunching unnaturally loud on the scattered debris, a sound immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. She found the main entrance to the exhibit, a massive rusted steel door, seemingly fused shut by time and corrosion. But then a faint rhythmic thump-thump resonated from deep within the structure, a colossal slow beat like a monstrous muffled projector. It wasn't the sound of settling ruins or distant machinery. It was too regular, too powerful, too impossibly alive and contained. It seemed to defy the very light stillness it was shrouded in. Hours passed under the oppressive sunless sky, perpetually veiled by the dense, low-hanging mist. The silence grew heavier, more pervasive, now accompanied by a subtle, almost imperceptible pressure building behind her eyes. She tried to dismiss it as a psychological effect of extreme visual deprivation and prolonged perceptual paradox. But the sensation persisted. A dull ache had resonated deep within her skull, mirroring the rhythmic thump. Her biometric suit registered. Erratic neural activity, localized spikes in her occipital lobe, often associated with visual processing, even though there was no external visual stimulus to process beyond the static light. Her portable spectral analysis drones, after hours of sweeping the vast silent halls, finally locked on to a major undeniable anomaly. Not just zero light movement, but a consistent rhythmic quantum entanglement frequency emanating from deep beneath the exhibit's foundation. This frequency was not astrophysical. It was fluid organic, like a vast pulsating signal. And from its very core, the thump intensified to a palpable throb, along with a faint luminous pulse captured by the drone's exotic energy imaging. Not heat, but pure contained static light. A deep, impossible photographic gray, like a faded ancient image, but somehow terrifyingly intrinsically sentient. She whispered into her recorder again, her academic detachment fractured by awe and profound dread. The source, it's deep, beneath the main display hall, emitting a non-thermal luminous pulse. A deep organic photographic gray. The rhythmic beat, it's emanating directly from its core. The pressure, I feel it clearer now. It's like the exhibit is watching. The folklore mentioned light that stopped time. This is it. This is the source. This is what truly freezes Evergreen Exhibit. A cold metallic taste filled her mouth, a taste of burgeoning existential dread. Driven by a dangerous, irresistible combination of scientific imperative, fueled by the sheer impossibility of her discovery, and a burgeoning icy fear that chilled her to the core. Anya located the precise epicenter of the pulsing, photographic gray anomaly. It was a section of the exhibit's deepest sublevels beneath the main gallery, where massive concrete sections and rusted display mechanisms lay half-buried in the damp earth. The air here was utterly still, heavy with a profound earthy scent, now tinged with a faint, cloying sweetness like burnt chemicals, mixed with something vaguely electrical, like ozone from old projectors. The photographic gray light pulsed from within. The very ground, a vast subterranean core, its rhythm, a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to synchronize with her own. She noticed peculiar, intricate patterns within the exposed bedrock itself, not just natural striations, but swirling inclusions that resembled frozen light trails or perhaps trapped fragments of visual memory. She moved cautiously towards the source, her suit's lights cutting solitary beams through the oppressive gloom. The ground beneath her felt unnervingly soft, despite its solid appearance, almost like walking on vast, taut membranes. She could hear her own heartbeat unnaturally loud, echoing only within her own skull. But then other sensations began to intrude not from outside, but from within her own mind. Faint, fragmented memories, half-formed thoughts, almost whispers of impossible images rising and falling with a photographic gray pulse. It was profoundly disconcerting, like her own visual memory was being played back to her distorted and amplified, woven with other alien impressions. She reached the center of the anomaly, where the photographic gray glow was brightest. Here, amidst the wreckage of the sublevels, something impossible was located. It wasn't just rock. It was a vast organic mass, pulsating softly, half-buried beneath. The ground, its surface slick and vaguely membranous, radiating the photographic gray light. It was massive, stretching out of sight into the unseen depths. It had the distinct rhythm of the thump, thump, thump she'd felt. This was the source of the exhibit's endless pulse, a colossal organic projector. And then just beside the pulsating mass, something horrifying came into focus. Not machinery, but a humanoid figure partially submerged within the glowing shifting organic mass, as if caught mid-absorption. Its face agonizingly clear, despite the faint photographic gray glow, was contorted in a silent scream, its hands, outstretched fingers splayed. It was a man, likely Silas Evergreen himself, the visionary founder from 1958. His features were distinct, his expression raw terror. He was not merely a corpse, he was perfectly horrifyingly preserved, his essence suspended within the living tissue. A testament to an unspeakable fate. Anya stared horrified. This was beyond anything she had conceived. Not geological, not even photonic. Biological. She activated her bioscanner, pointing it at the organic mass of flesh. The readings were impossible. Not inert, not dead. There was persistent bioelectrical activity, faint, erratic, but undeniably present. The mass wasn't just preserving, it was sustaining. Against all logical judgment, compelled by a desperate need to understand, Anya reached out a gloved hand and gently placed it on the surprisingly warm, yielding surface of the organic mass encasing the man's arm. The moment her glove made contact, a searing jolt, not physical, but purely mental, shot through her. Her vision blurred, filled with a blinding flash of photographic gray light. And then she was plunged into a torrent of raw, unfiltered sensation. Not words, but a rapid-fire sequence of images and emotions, the sudden, crushing immobility of light, the agonizing sensation of her own movements, being fractured into endless static frames, the horrifying realization that her very essence, her ability to perceive continuity, was being consumed, absorbed by the entity around her. And then a single agonizing, voiceless scream, echoing in an absolute suffocating void of frozen moments. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. Anya recoiled, tearing her hand away from the living mass, gasping for breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The internal thump, thump, thump in her head intensified, now accompanied by fainter, more ethereal flickers from within her own mind, like a broken film reel. This was not a passive entity. This was a living projector, and it held conscious agony. The mental jolt from touching the organic mass reverberated through Anya, leaving her gasping, disoriented, her mind reeling from the torrent of borrowed terror. She stumbled backward, her suit's internal systems screaming warnings about neurological overload. The chilling images of the man's final moments, the crushing visual stasis, the horror of existential non-continuity, the voiceless scream, were burned into her retinas, echoing in her thoughts. The profound light stillness of Evergreen. Exhibit seemed to press in harder, now no longer just an absence of movement, but a conscious, palpable presence. The subtle thump, thump, thump from the ground intensified, transforming into a deep, resonant bass note that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet, through the soles of her boots, up into her bones. It felt like a colossal living camera, perpetually snapping a vast, patient, predatory image of reality's undoing. She spoke into her recorder, her voice hoarse, strained. November 20th, 2:40 p.m. Direct contact made with organic anomaly. Experienced immediate, intense psychological feedback. Shared subjective experience of temporal stasis. The entity. It captures moments. It preserves the immobility of time. The mass is not inert. It's a living archive consuming all motion. My brainwave patterns are erratic. My mind, it feels stretched, fragmented, static. She paused, listening to the new, deeper bass note. The flickers. It's still there. Faint, rhythmic, from within. She forced herself to calm, to analyze. The data, streaming from her bioscanner, pointed at the living mass was impossible. High concentrations of complex biological polymers interwoven with unknown fluid structures, and persistent high-level bioelectrical signatures far beyond typical cellular decay rates. These were not dead organisms. They were suspended alive, in some terrifying, agonizing state of perpetual visual freeze-frame. The entity was a living, sentient biological machine, capable of absorbing and retaining the essence of life and its final panicked moments of utter stasis. As she moved carefully through the derelict cellar, avoiding direct contact with the most intensely pulsating patches of the organic mass, the bass note deepened, becoming a vast resonant symphony that seemed to emanate from every surface. The air itself began to shimmer, subtly distorting her vision. She started seeing fleeting ethereal images projected directly into her mind's eye, not memories of the man she touched, but other fragmented visual experiences. A blurred figure briefly appearing in her peripheral vision, frozen mid-stride, then instantly vanishing, only to reappear a moment later a few feet to her right, as if time itself was stuttering. A disembodied hand, her own, briefly superimposed over another's, clutching a camera that was fused in place. The terrifying realization that the exhibit wasn't just displaying glitches, it was generating them or focusing an external force that did. She glimpsed fragmented faces of other staff members, old visitors, superimposed over the decaying concrete, their features distorted, shifting their eyes wide with incomprehension, their mouths open in silent, desperate pleas. They were echoes of other selves of vanished observers, eternally trapped in the exhibit's warped stasis. The living mass itself seemed to actively draw her in a seductive, irresistible pull emanating from its slick surface. It wasn't a physical suction, but a deep subconscious urge to step into its perfect stillness, to merge, to understand the profound emptiness, the agonizing peace it offered. Her gaze kept returning to the horrifying beauty of the pulsating mass. its internal photographic gray glow promising ultimate truth, eternal tranquility in temporal oblivion. She felt a profound sense of weariness, an aching desire to simply lie down on its yielding surface, to let the hum wash over her, to become part of its vast living memory of unraveling moments. Her own will felt strangely weak, the boundaries of herself eroding under the constant mental assault. She activated her specialized chronometric sensor, aiming it at the surface of the most vibrant patch of the organic mass. The readings were bizarre. The mass itself was generating a subtle internal temporal anomaly, actively bending and absorbing temporal flow, creating localized pockets of visual stillness. This anomaly wasn't a byproduct of physics. It was consistent, regulated, almost like the internal process of a vast biological system. This was a living organism, a colossal predatory entity, slowly consuming the very concept of continuous time. And then she saw it. Streaks of deeper, more vibrant photographic gray within the mass, forming intricate pulsing patterns that shifted and flowed like vast unseen neurological pathways. This mass was the entity's body, its flesh, its mind. She realized with a horrifying clarity that the legends were wrong. The exhibit wasn't just abandoned, it was freezing, and everything within it. The terrifying realization solidified in Anya's mind. The living organic mass was not merely a biological anomaly, but a vast predatory entity, slowly consuming and assimilating the very fabric of time and perception, transforming living continuity into its own monstrous unified form. The constant low bass note vibrated through the air, growing more insistent, drawing her closer to the heart of the exhibit's lowest level. The mental echoes were no longer random fragments. They became more focused, more personal whispers, not of the victims, but seemingly directed at her. You seek timelessness. We provide. Be absorbed. Be eternal. The words were formless, yet undeniably present in her thoughts, a seductive, invasive presence. She stumbled forward, driven by a desperate need to find evidence to prove this impossible. Horror. She saw it then, an active temporal stasis zone. A section of a display case ahead seemed to ripple its glass, subtly absorbing light, then releasing it, defying visual stability. A half-decayed flower inside briefly appeared perfectly fresh, then snapped back to its rotted state, its petals frozen mid-fall. Objects like scattered photographs or old cameras would momentarily flicker out of existence and reappear a foot to the left as if their temporal coordinates were stuttering. It was happening in real time. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but inexorable. Her solid perception of reality slowly warped, becoming part of the living, pulsating organism. Further ahead, closer to the largest section of the organic mass, she saw something even more disturbing. A large wild fox, its form shimmering, half-submerged in the glowing, shifting organic mass. Its powerful hind legs still free, but its front paws, torso and head already solidified into translucent photographic gray flesh. Its eyes, wide with unspeakable agony, reflected the terrifying beauty of the mass's glow. The bass note resonated from it, and Anya felt a surge of raw animalistic terror, a desperate, futile struggle erupting in her mind as she inadvertently brushed her gloved hand against a low-lying section of the living mass. The fox was not dead. It was trapped alive in its silent flesh tomb, experiencing eternal, disorienting agony. It's ongoing, she gasped into her recorder, her voice a raw whisper. The assimilation. It's not a past event. It's happening now. It's absorbing living organisms, and they're aware. They're conscious within the flesh. Their moments are stuck. She could feel a faint, almost imperceptible cold radiating from the very air around her, a subtle decrease in the ambient temperature that her suit registered consistent with a vast biological process consuming energy. The sweet, cloying scent was stronger, almost suffocating. As she watched the horrifying transformation of the display case, a fine, almost invisible vapor began to rise from the surface of the living mass, shimmering with faint photographic gray motes. It was not mist, it was a diffusion of the entity's essence, a fine, almost gaseous form of the living tissue itself. It swirled around her suit, clinging to the visor, making her vision subtly blurry. She felt an unsettling, tingling sensation on her exposed skin, around the cuffs of her gloves, and the unprotected areas of her neck. It was a subtle stickiness, a faint tackiness, like dried, invisible residue. She tried to wipe it away, but it seemed to cling stubbornly. Then, from the largest section of the living mass, the ground itself seemed to undulate. A wave rippled outwards from its colossal bulk, not of concrete, but of pulsating photographic gray flesh, smoothly extending, seeking. And then from the surface of the mass, several translucent, flexible tendrils, gleaming with internal photographic gray light, slowly emerged. They were too perfectly formed to be natural roots or muscle. They were too purposeful in their movement. They moved slowly, sinuously, like probing fingers extending towards the flickering objects, towards the absorbing fox, and terrifyingly towards her. The entity was not just consuming passively, it was reaching. The mental intrusions intensified now, accompanied by fragmented, distorted voices, not from the air, but from within her mind. Terrified, pleading whispers joining the entity's pervasive bass note. Stop here. Forever. She felt her own legs heavy, her movements sluggish, as if the very essence of the entity was beginning to seep into her joints, slowing her reactions. The terrifying realization solidified the entity wasn't just physical. It was a vast conscious time eater, a trap laid for decades, and she had stumbled into its very core. The translucent photographic gray tendrils, gleaming with internal light, extended from a vast organic mass inching across the damp ground towards Anya. Their movement was slow, deliberate, utterly silent, yet filled with an insidious, unyielding purpose. The mental intrusions roared in her mind, a chorus of fragmented pleas and the entity's vast, unfeeling command: freeze, capture, be assimilated. She could feel a subtle, unsettling cold radiating from the tendrils, a cold that promised not comfort, but absorption into oblivion. Her own will felt fragile, battered by the constant psychic assault. She stumbled backward, desperately trying to evade the slow, methodical reach of the tendrils. Her suit's internal systems screamed warnings about high-frequency energy absorption. The air around her was now thick with the fine, shimmering, photographic gray vapor clinging to her suit, her skin permeating her every breath. The sweet, cloying scent was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. She risked a glance down at her gloved hand. A faint, almost imperceptible blurring of motion was beginning to form on the surface of her glove. A subtle, jerky distortion that looked disturbingly similar to the initial stages of time stasis she had observed. She frantically tried to rub it off, but it clung, subtly hardening. It was already spreading. The entity was not just reaching for her, it was actively consuming her molecule by molecule, her very perception becoming the preliminary layer of its terrible, time-devouring flesh. "It's on me," she gasped into her recorder, her voice raw with the terror that transcended scientific curiosity. "The photographic gray vapor, it's infesting? I'm freezing. My vision, it's skipping frames. My thoughts, they feel stuck. She tried to move her fingers, but they seemed to briefly lock in place and snap forward, leaving her disoriented, her understanding of her own continuity unraveling. The massive organic mass from which the tendrils emanated began to pulse with a renewed, brighter photographic gray light. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump intensified, rising in pitch, becoming a low echoing thrum like a vast malfunctioning projector filling her head. The mental intrusions were no longer whispers, but loud, horrifying echoes of agonizing screams, thousands of trapped minds crying out in an unspeakable chorus of terror and eternal consciousness. This was the raw, unfiltered song of Evergreen Exhibit, composed of the final moments of all it had consumed, eternally cycling in a loop of frozen moments. Anya knew she couldn't fight it physically. The tendrils were slowly but surely gaining on her, their fleshy tips almost touching her boots. The realization that she was facing a vast, sentient, predatory consciousness, one that consumed life and processed time, hammered into her mind with brutal clarity. She was just another still frame for its endless gallery, another moment consumed by its terrifying living light. Her eyes darted around the crumbling cellar, desperate. Her gaze fell upon her autonomous drone lying discarded near the edge of the sub-level, having crashed earlier due to the intense energy interference. Its outer shell was already partially coated in the thin photographic gray vapor, but its internal recording systems, designed to be hardened against extreme environments, might still be functional. If she could reach it, if she could transfer her final horrifying data, her last observations before she became completely assimilated. It was a desperate, illogical hope. She lunged towards the drone, forcing her stiffening limbs to move. The photographic gray tendrils, sensing her movement, accelerated their fleshy tips, striking the ground just inches behind her feet. The echoing hum of the exhibit intensified to a piercing whine, causing agonizing pain in her skull. The mental screams of the trapped souls became a deafening chorus, drowning out her own thoughts, pulling her towards the edge of madness. She reached the drone, her stiff fingers fumbling with the data port. The blurring of motion on her gloved hand was visibly thicker, now her movements becoming slow, deliberate, almost stop motion. She slammed her suit's data cable into the drone's port, initiating an emergency upload. The drone's small indicator light flickered green, then blue, then with a final desperate surge glowing a steady photographic gray, mirroring the light that consumed the exhibit. Data was transferring, her knowledge, her warnings. But the tendrils were upon her. They wrapped around her legs, her arms subtle at first, then firm, pulling her gently, inexorably towards the vast organic mass of the time-eating exhibit hall. She could feel the photographic gray film spreading rapidly across her entire suit over her faceplate, slowly obscuring her vision, turning the world into a single blinding, shifting haze of impossible stillness. The pervasive echoing hum became a part of her, vibrating through every cell. The mental screams of the trapped souls were no longer external. They were her screams merging with the chorus. Her final thought, as the photographic gray flesh fully encased her faceplate, her eyes wide and staring, her body frozen mid-struggle, was not of fear, but a horrifying, agonizing clarity. She was Evergreen Exhibit now, and she remembered every moment, and she was still. Final voiceover line, distinct and chilling, and deep within the Evergreen Exhibit, a new frame was added to the timeless display, perfectly preserved, perfectly still, forever screaming in silence.